Guten Dagen on top of it.
That was my terrible pronunciation of an Old Norse greeting from the late first millennium. It means, and I hope I've got this right, hello, good day, and welcome. Wait, you say. Have I tuned into the wrong podcast? Why is this guy talking about Old Norse? No, you're right where you ought to be, friend listener, here in the cozy embrace of the classic English literature subcast. And I've slaughtered some Old Norse here because this is the first in what will no doubt be a chronic, if intermittent series of what I shall call the out-of-time episodes. You may remember that I recently did a bonus episode on the differences between the three texts of Hamlet, even though the Hamlet episode was just ages ago now. And I did that to fulfill a listener's request, but that gave me an idea. You see, it's inevitable that, while doing a historical survey of English literature, you're bound to miss out things you should have included. But by the time you realize that you forgot to talk about, let's just pick something completely at random. Let's say, for instance, the variations in the published Hamlets, or the fact that I failed to discuss the Scandinavian influence on Old English during our early medieval episodes. But I've realized my glaring oversight only too late as our historical time frame marches relentlessly on. So what to do? Just ignore it and leave a gap in my listeners' knowledge as gaping and wide as an axe wound? Well, no, certainly not. Why not just admit to the mistake, correct it, and then move on? That seems the prudent course. So, out-of-time episodes will pop up from time to time, as it were, when I notice that I've missed out something important or interesting from an earlier literary period. In fact, I've already thought of a couple of other ideas for out-of-time episodes that will make their way into your feeds in the fullness of time. Today, surely the pennies dropped, I want to fill in some missing pieces on the development of English in the 9th and 10th centuries, especially as regards the Danish invasions and Norse raiders. So, come with me, let's jump into the Wayback Machine. Let's leave Stuart England behind for the nonce and set our dials for the year 793. The place, Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria. You know what? Let's not stop at Lindisfarne right now. This seems like an inconvenient time. Whew. What we have narrowly escaped, friend listener, is the inauguration of the Viking Age in England. On June 8th, 793, a group of Scandinavian raiders attacked the monastery on Lindisfarne, raping, looting, and pillaging, killing monks and desecrating relics. The sudden brutality of the attack shocked Christian Europe, and an architecture of fortification marked the continent for centuries. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the event, quote,
"Here terrible portents came about over the land of Northumbria, and miserably frightened the people. These were immense flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. A great famine immediately followed these signs, and a little after that, in the same year, on 8 June, the raiding of the heathen men miserably devastated God's church in Lindisfarne Island by looting and slaughter."
Now, while this is the first recorded offensive by what would come to be called Vikings against England, the Chronicle does note that the Danes' first significant appearance was in 789, quote,
"And in his days there came for the first time 3 ships, and then the reeve rode there, and wanted to compel them to go to the king's town, because he did not know what they were, and they killed him. Those were the first ships of the Danish men which sought out the land of the English race.
Over the next 2 centuries, raids by men from modern-day Denmark, Sweden, and Norway would radically alter English culture and language. By the early 9th century, isolated smash-and-grab raids like that at Lindisfarne gave way to more organized military incursions, culminating in the 865 invasion of the so-called Great Heathen Army, and they were a confederation of Viking forces which sought to conquer East Anglia, Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex. By the year 878, only Wessex under King Alfred the Great held out against the invaders. Now, in May of that year, Alfred finally defeated the great Viking army at Ithenbrunn, now Eddington, which resulted in the Treaty of Wedmore. Now that's important because in that agreement, Alfred and the Viking king Guthrum established territorial boundaries along the Thames and Lee rivers. These boundaries would eventually become a formal Danelaw. That is, areas in which English kings allowed Danes to exercise their own power and keep their own laws, basically conquered territory. However, Alfred's descendants began to push against this treaty, and by the 10th century, they were launching incursions seeking to retake the territory from the Danelaw. Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, overcame a coalition of Viking and Scottish warriors at Brunanburg in 937, redeeming his claim to be the Rex Anglorum, the king of all the English. Yes, the first English king. His victory is commemorated in a poem found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which begins,
In this year King Athelstan, lord of earls, ring-giver of warriors, and his brother as well, Edmund Aetheling, achieved everlasting glory in battle, with the edges of swords near Brunanburg. They cleaved the mast shields, hewed the battle-wood, the relics of hammers of the heir of Edvard, as it suited their heritage, so that they often in battle defended their lands, treasures, and homesteads against every one of the hateful.
This is kind of the beginning of the end for Viking power in England. Eric Bloodaxe, king of Norway and sometime king of Northumbria, not to mention featuring rather prominently in the semi-legendary sagas, he dies in 954. The last Viking victory in England worth mentioning occurs in 991, when Olaf Tryggvason defeats Ethelred the Unready's English at the Battle of Malden. That battle is commemorated in a poem of the same name, which focuses on the heroism of the ill-fated English leader Berchtnoth. But, quote, the slaughter wolves waded, caring not for the water. The Viking army westward across the Pant, across the bright waters, carrying their board shields, sailing men to the shore, bearing yellow linden. There they stood ready against the ferocious one, Berchtnoth and his warriors. He ordered them to form a shield wall with their shields and for the army to hold fast against their foes. Then was the fighting near, glory in battle. The time was coming that fated men must fall there. In the years following Malden, however, the Vikings were reduced to mere harrying raids. The last real gasp comes in 1066, of course, when Harold Hardrada falls to the last Anglo-Saxon king, Harold Godwinson. The Viking Age in England had ended. Well, sort of. Of course, we know that Godwinson himself was soon to be overthrown by William the Conqueror at Hastings. William was, of course, the Duke of Normandy, a Danelaw in the north of France that had been established by the Viking ruler Rollo. So Billy the Bastard and his followers were all descended from good, hardy Viking stock. These 2+ centuries of battle, appeasement, settlement, and battle exerted a profound effect upon the language of England. While the rise of Alfred's Wessex had begun to make that kingdom's dialect a de facto standard English, the introduction of Scandinavian culture complicated that process. Old Norse seems to be the primary language of these Viking peoples. And perhaps I should clarify here that the name Viking, while common and useful for us today, is really rather inaccurate and anachronistic, historically speaking. Don't historians like to take the fun out of everything? Despite my casual usage of the phrase a moment ago, there is no such thing as the Viking people. That term developed from the Old Norse word vikingur, which referred to a person who engaged in Viking, a term that originally meant a pirate raid. The verb form Viking meant to go on an expedition or raid, usually by sea. However, the exact origin of the original term vikingur is debated. Some scholars suggest it may be linked to the Old Norse word vik, meaning bay or inlet, something like that, so that Vikings were people of the bay, right? Seafarers. Others think the Old English word wick, meaning camp, as in a military or raiding encampment, might have played a role, as Old English derived the term wicking to similarly describe raiders or pirates, particularly those from the Scandinavian regions. So, Viking was originally an activity, not a people. But we now regularly refer to early medieval Scandinavian raiders as Vikings, and I will continue to do so here as well. Talk about spoiling the fun. They didn't wear big horny helmets either. Really, when you think about it, what a stupid idea that would be, right? Excellent way of getting your enemy's sharp, pointy weapon tangled up very near your head region. But whatever we call these people, they have left their footprints all over the English language. The earliest borrowings into English obviously had to do with seafaring and battle. Words like knife and slaughter and berserk. The original for the English word boatswain, the ship's officer, is the Norse batsvagen. As settlement progressed in the Danelaw, we can note Norse influences on English place names. Most common are those cities and towns whose names end in by, a Norse suffix meaning farm or town. So we've Grimsby and Danby and so on. Also, the suffix thorp, meaning village to the Vikings, can be found in places named Mablethorpe or Scunthorpe, and the thwaite ending, which means meadow, in places like Slaithwaite in Huddersfield. We can also thank the Vikings for one of the most common name endings in English. It's the SON ending, which gives us our most common patronymic, that is, name of the father. So the Norse gave us Johnsons and Stevensons and Robertsons. Perhaps the most profound impact of Old Norse on Old English is the former's contribution of third-person plural pronouns. Our modern-day they, their, and them come from Scandinavia and were rather easily incorporated into English because they solved a problem in this language. Old English third-person plural was hia, which unfortunately sounds rather close to the third-person singular feminine hea. The Norse pronouns evaporated that potential confusion. Now, although highly disputed, there may be a Norse influence in the development of that heo, which itself doesn't sound too different from the masculine he, into the more distinctive she, but, as I say, highly disputed. Additionally, the Norse gave English one of its most common verbs, the second and third person versions of the verb to be, that is, are. We are, you are, that one. In other verb news, The suffix s at the end of third-person singular present indicative verbs is a Viking innovation, so a brief sentence like "she runs" may ultimately be Norse in origin. And yeah, of course, how can we forget our Norse day of the week, Thursday, or Thor's Day, the day of the god of thunder? The Oxford English Dictionary, I think, officially lists like 30 words that begin with either SK or SC as English words borrowed in the Viking Age. Think skirt or sky or scathe. But if we expand our horizons to include dialectical words, well, now we're pushing maybe 1,200 contributions to the English vocabulary. Incidentally, the Norse skirt and the English shirt originally referred to the same garment, Norse SK words often being cognate with English SH words, which is why so many brief theatrical episodes are terrible, because skits are shit. No, that's not true. Later on, we decided that shirts are for tops and skirts are for bottoms, but at the start, those words meant the same thing. And that's actually my favorite Norse to English crossover, the word thing. A thing in medieval Scandinavia meant a public assembly, like council of elders or something, and came from Proto-Germanic roots meaning affair or matter or even lawsuit, actually. Some scholars maintain that thing finds its ultimate origin in a word meaning the appointed time. Anyway, it's something about meetings to discuss weighty matters. It starts to take on its modern meaning of a non-specific inanimate object probably around the Middle English period, maybe the start of the 14th century, meaning, at first, personal possessions, my things. Why that transformation happened is a mystery as deep and profound as why clocks go clockwise. So there you have it, a little brief episode on how the Viking Age permanently altered the English language and thereby English literature. From personal names to place names to vast vocabulary contributions to influential changes in grammar, modern English would be an impossibility without those rapacious Northmen. I hope the monks at Lindisfarne take some comfort from that. All right, let's climb back into our out-of-time machine and whisk ourselves back to Jacobean England. Thanks very much for listening to the Classic English Literature Subcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider posting a 5-star review on your listening platform. If you liked it so much you're thinking to yourself, I'd like to buy that guy a beer. Well, you can. Just click the Support the Show button to make a financial contribution, and I shall toast your generosity to the very echo. Take it easy, folks. I'll talk to you soon.